Go ahead, Alicia.
Hello, everyone. I am so grateful to be here today. And y'all, this conversation is one that feels so sacred because it sits at the intersection of faith, healing, advocacy, and purpose. Today, myself, Alicia Diggs, Dr. Alicia Diggs, I have the honor of sitting with a woman who is not only living with HIV, but living out loud with intention, with faith, and with a deep commitment to making sure no one else feels left alone in their journey. LaToya Murchison is an advocate and author, a woman of faith, and a visionary behind Toya's Quiet Storm, which is a movement rooted in truth telling, healing, and breaking stigma. And what makes this moment even more powerful is that this conversation is happening during her eighth Posiversary. 8 years of navigating, growing, healing, and transforming. So today, we're not just hearing a story, we're witnessing a journey. So, LaToya, I am so honored to sit with you today. How are you?
I'm doing fine, and thank you for accepting the invitation to be my host for today.
Absolutely. This is so exciting. So, let's go on ahead and jump right in. So, Toya, how about this? How about you take us back to 2018? What do you first remember most about the moment you received your diagnosis, and how did that moment begin to shape the woman who you are today?
I remember sitting in my hospital room with my mom, and I remember the doctor coming in saying, "Miss Murchison, you tested positive." And I said, "Positive for what?" She said, "HIV." And I just looked at her, and she walked back out the door and didn't say anything else. And I looked over at my mom, and I watched her stand up. She came towards me and wrapped her arms around me, and I started crying. And she just held on to me and said, "I love you. You're going to be okay. We got this." And in that moment, I knew that she was going to be the strength that I needed to get through this process. And she has been there every step of the way. Make sure I have my meds, make sure I have everything that I needed. And the rest of my family is the same way. So without them, I wouldn't be able to sit here today to tell y'all my story.
I love that. And thank you for sharing. Those moments stay with us in such a deep way. And, it's so wonderful it's awful to go through some things, but when you do go through it, to not have to go through it alone, to have family, to have people that you love and trust be right there. And, for me, just hearing that, it just feels really special to be having this conversation. So, with everything that you said, this episode marks your eighth posiversary. So that's 8 years since your diagnosis. And, when you reflect on who you were in a moment versus who you are today, what growth are you most proud of and what has sustained you along the way?
I would say I went from being depressed, and thinking that I was gonna die, to living out loud. Because when I first found out, I had actually started planning my funeral. I had every details from who would be there, who would sing, who would preach, what I would wear, everything. But as I started to learn more about HIV and do education, and um, being on my first event at my church, which is the first time I spoke out loud, I knew that I had to continue to tell my story, so anyone else that came in behind me in this movement, they will understand that there's life after a diagnosis.
I love that. And, with you sharing that, I really just hear so much strength in your journey. Many who have a faith relationship, that's what we hold on to. And without it and without the support of our faith family, it can be challenging. Um, so I'm just glad that, you have that support.
Thank you.
The work that you are doing is deeply rooted in faith. How did your relationship with God shift or deepen even after your diagnosis? And what did healing beyond the physical look like for you?
Ooh. That's a twofold question.
No, that's a good one. So, how did your relationship with God shift or deepen after that diagnosis? And what did healing beyond the physical look like for you?
It got deeper. I got more into the word.
Mm.
I actually bought me a 52 week Bible study, and each day I completed a day. I would say how I was feeling that day, what was I experiencing, and what was I expecting to receive from God through that process. And as far as my faith is, if I didn't have my faith, I wouldn't be able to sit here right now. Trusting in God and leaning on Him let me know that even though doctors at, thought they were giving me a death sentence, He spoke to me and said, "I'm giving you life." And it makes me think back to that, just first getting that diagnosis, sitting in that room. Once she told me that, and after sitting there with my mom, I actually went and started praying in the bathroom. That became my prayer closet. And even now, I have a wall in my kitchen that says "Wall of Faith," and it has different faith Bible verses that I look at every day.
I love that. And that kind of healing right there, it doesn't happen, loudly all the time. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes it's, internal. Affirmations are amazing. I know that through my journey, affirmations help me, and I love even using them now. And it's just a little pick me up sometimes, just a little bit to encourage you.
Right.
So with that type of healing, even being quiet and internal, I love the name Toya's Quiet Storm. Can you share what that represents for you and how that initiative actually allowed you to turn your pain into purpose?
Toya's Quiet Storm actually started, with getting my diagnosis, because HIV at that time, HIV was a quiet storm in my life. It was wreaking havoc on my body, and I didn't know. But once I got out of the hospital, and like I said, start doing education and meeting people in the community, like meeting people like you who have become my mentor, my sister, and my friend, Toya's Quiet Storm evolved into me speaking out loud, educating others, and like I said, always letting people know I'm thriving. I may have HIV, but HIV does not have me. And I've done some workshops. I've done several interviews on different podcasts, just sharing my story. So people, number one, you have a face to the condition. Number two, it shows you that just because the way I look doesn't determine if I have HIV or not. You would never know if I never spoke those words. So I wanted to encourage people that you'll survive. There's life after diagnosis.
Absolutely. And I love how you did turn your pain into purpose with that. And, I think it's so central to who you are. And, even kind of flowing with that, your podcast centers the quote, even in the storm, purpose still speaks. So, what does that mean to you personally? And how have you learned to hear your purpose, especially in the hardest moments of your journey?
Well, I had to learn to sit down and allow myself to be quiet while listening to God's voice. Because when I have those dark moments where I don't want to get out of bed, or I feel like I'm being punished, God reminds me, I never left your side. I am with you. And in this moment where you feel that you can't walk on your own, stand on my shoulders and I'll guide you until you can fully stand again.
I love that. As believers, many of us know we can't do anything without God. I mean, whoever your higher being is, but for us, the way that we maneuver through our spiritual life, like Goodness gracious, we can't get up in the morning without guys breathing that breath down on us. So that's amazing. And the way you've listened to that purpose, you've done that through sharing your story openly. Um, so since you've been open about your journey, what has been the most powerful or unexpected response you received from sharing your story publicly?
The love and the care that I receive from others. When I first told my story in 2019, I wasn't sure how I was going to be received, but I knew that I had to get it off my chest because I had to come out of hiding, and I wanted to be the one to tell my story and not anyone else tell it for me. And since then, it just reminds me that God hasn't forgot about me. Like I said, it just goes back to my faith. It reminds me every day that I wake up and open my eyes, I am reminded that God has not forgot about me. They said I wouldn't make it until I was till 25, and this year I'll be 48. And then I thank God every day for all those extra years that He gave me that man said I would never see.
I know that's right. And nobody can tell your story like you. People can try, but it's always going to be some essential piece that's missing that actually tells the story of who and why you are.
Yes,
Um,
ma'am.
I want to transition into like your writing. Not only do you speak your story, you write about it, you document it, you pour it into pages. So, you are an accomplished author with multiple books rooted in reflection and prayer. How has writing served as both a healing tool for you and a ministry for others?
Writing has become my therapy. One of my favorite books of mine is Forever Change, and it's where I share my journal, which Quiet Storm is how my journal started. Dear Quiet Storm. And each day I would write how I was feeling, because being able to do that, I was able to speak words that I couldn't speak out loud to someone else. And in writing and being able to share these moments with others, I want them to know that there's healing. I want to share my story so people know, you number one, they're not alone. You can live, you can grow, and you can heal.
That's it. That's it. And that's absolutely powerful and important, because when you're going through, a lot of times you don't even know how you're going to get out of that situation, if you're going to get out that situation, and actually what's the thing you can do to get out of that situation or get through that situation. So I'm glad you have those foundations to help you maneuver through.
Thank you.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Um, so beyond the personal and spiritual work, you step fully into advocacy and community. And as someone involved with organizations, with some of the different organizations that you're a part of, faith based spaces, what do you believe is still missing when it comes to supporting Black women living with HIV, especially in faith communities?
Hmm. Compassion.
Mm,
A lot of people are afraid to talk about the subject. They feel that they'll be judged by just saying the words HIV. A lot of people don't have education. So without that education, they're like, they make up in their mind, okay, this person is maybe someone I don't need to be beside, or this can happen to me if I connect with this person. And I can speak, like, for example, I remember when I did that first event in my church, Um, it was interesting, but I remember how well received I was and the people that I brought in to speak were received. Of course, everybody had questions about HIV, but there was no negativity in the room. It was everything was positive. So it was at that moment that I knew I could speak to anyone if I was able to speak in front of my church family.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that you mentioned compassion. I feel like today, in today's time, with so much going on and people's mental health being impacted in such a heavy way, we kind of miss compassion. Sometimes forget what that looks like to give compassion or even to receive it. And even in this work, the education, like a lot of questions are like, you know, why is stigma still going on? And really it comes down to lack of education and people having access to that education. If we're not continuing to talk about it, then it gets put in the back of people's minds or it gets just brushed away. And education has to come, it's not one size fits all. It has to come differently depending on which community or whom you're talking to or impacting.
Definitely.
So, you've said in the past that you're not just surviving, you're thriving. What does thriving with HIV look like for you today? And how has that definition evolved over time?
Hmm. I, number one, make sure I take my medicine every day because without that medication, I wouldn't be able to thrive. My body would continue to go down like it was doing before when I first was diagnosed. It also, let's see, thriving. I'm more positive than I was before. I don't have a lot of those depressed moments that I had in the beginning. Like I said, every day I wake up, I am reminded that I have a purpose. And my purpose, part of my purpose is to be the voice for those that aren't able to speak. Be a voice for those who feel ashamed or don't have that support system that I have. Be that voice to let people know that HIV is not killing us. It is giving us another purpose. Like meeting you when I first was diagnosed, I I felt alone. I felt isolated, and at times I wonder how I was going to make it through each day. But once I found my community, once I educated myself, once I started speaking out loud, I was able to see that you can do this. You can keep going. You can keep pushing. You can live out loud and not be ashamed. I no longer worry of how or if people will accept me.
Right.
I speak out often about my diagnosis because it's who I am now. It's part of who I am. I can never get away from that. So without not being able to get away from it, why not use it as a positive? And like you said earlier, a ministry of being able to help other people.
Amen. Preach, preacher.
Well,
You mentioned some of this, but I'm gonna go ahead and ask this. Often a diagnosis can try to redefine how people see themselves. How did you reclaim your identity outside of HIV, and who did you discover yourself to be in that process?
hmm, how did I reclaim? I learned to stop sitting in the background. I learned that I didn't have to do all the back work while everybody else was standing in the front. it I've become motivational speaker. I've increased my faith life. I mm, I don't know. I love people out loud.
Yeah.
That's the main. I've learned how to love out loud. I've learned not to be ashamed. I learned to be more positive. I learned, most importantly, to forgive myself. In forgiving myself, that allowed me to live. Because when I was mad at myself, I wasn't living. I wouldn't leave my house. Now I go on trips. I speak to different church groups at times. I have sat on a stage where I was honored for being a community leader. And in that moment, sitting there speaking, I was like, wow, you can do this. You can do this.
Yes, I love that. And the out loud. When you hear from me, when you think of like loud, like it's noisy or whatever, sometimes it could be overbearing, but no, loving out loud in this way is actually soft to me, intentional and powerful. So I love that you said loving out. You allowed yourself to just love out loud. So, in loving out loud and doing all the things that you do, let's talk about strength for a little bit. Not always, when we talk about strength, sometimes we don't talk about those quiet struggles. So,
Mhm.
what are some of the hardest internal battles that you faced that people didn't see? And how did you navigate those moments?
Hmm. Like number one was my health. I had to learn to better care of myself in those first 6 to 8 months. I didn't take care of myself like I was supposed to. I had gave up, but it's like a light bulb flickered and said, "This is not the end of you. You have to pick yourself up, get dressed, go out the house, and live." And each day I told myself that: get up, get dressed, live. Get up, get dressed, and live. And then it got to a point I didn't have to tell myself; I just automatically did that. And that has been the most one of the most powerful things for me, because that depressed state that I was in scared me. And one thing people don't know about that moment is I actually thought about taking my life because I felt like I died. So um I thank God for the people he has surrounded me with that reminds me that I have a purpose. And it wasn't until my pastor told me, he said, when you tell your story, you're going to deliver people. And I was like, okay, yeah, nah, I hear you. And I kept going. But as I sat there and a message came through from my mom during that event, she said, tell your story, set yourself free. And since that moment, I have been free. I'm not bound by the those three letters, HIV. I'm not bound by those. I'm not bound by the pain that I felt. I no longer feel any of that. I feel a peace that surpassed my own understanding. You gonna
Yeah.
quit making me I'm a waterhead.
I didn't do anything. Oh my goodness. Wow, that was powerful and definitely moving. And you talked about in the beginning the support from your mom and others as you have grown through all of this. So with having those people to help hold you up in your lowest moments, how did that shape the way you now show up for others as a support system?
Well, it showed me how to be there for other people. It showed me again how to love out loud.
Mhm.
It showed me how to be compassionate. It showed me how to be empathetic to others. And it taught me how to listen to understand without listening to respond. Because so often we listen to and respond to what someone is saying, but a lot of times when going through this HIV journey, you just need someone to listen to you so that you're not holding those hard feelings on the inside. You just want someone to understand you. So that's how.
Yes. Making space for healing. That's definitely what it's about and how important that is. And as you have been showing up for others and being a support system, let's talk about faith in the waiting. So
Mm.
there are moments when we pray and we pray and we pray, but the answers don't come right away. So, for you, how did you navigate seasons where you were waiting on God while still carrying the weight of your diagnosis, and not just your diagnosis, but everything else in life?
I had I got to a point where I had to remember that he'll never give me more than I can bear. And in those hard moments, like he said, he kept me surrounded by what I call earth angels. And those are the people that give me those extra hugs without knowing that I need them to be my strength in that moment. Or being able to pick up the phone and call like you or Cecilia or some other people that I know and say, "This is how I'm feeling today. I need you to help get me out this dark spot." And I'm just appreciative that even now where I still have the issues of pain and, like I said, not wanting to get up, I still remind myself that I have a purpose and I can't stay down. Because if I'm stay down, that means I'm giving up on myself. And I told God that I would never give it up on myself as long as He continued to love me.
Yes, yes. So, in everything that you said, just kind of translate into this next thing. When we talk about purpose, sometimes when people step into purpose, it feels like pressure to always be strong. Have you ever felt that tension? Of course you have. But how did you give yourself permission to just be and not always lead?
I actually had I've had some of the moments for the past 4 weeks as I had a hand surgery, and I had to remind myself that okay, you have 3 days. Them first 2 days, feel what you feel. That third day, you need to start picking yourself up because if you go past that third day, you're gonna go to a place that you know you promised God you will never go back to, and it's not always easy. When that third day came, I was just like, God, I know I promised, but I need you to give me a little extra strength to get through this third day. Because if
Mhm,
I go through this third day, that fourth day it's gonna be it ain't gonna be necessarily smooth sailing, but
mhm.
I can stand on my foundation.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, when you're a leader in the spotlight, it can be heavy. It's just speaking personally, I mean, it's scary in the beginning, and then you can get a little feel goods in between, but it can be a lot of pressure because for me, I can't speak for others who are in leadership, but it gets heavy because you don't want to let people down.
Yep.
You don't want to say the wrong thing.
Right.
You never know who's watching you. And I used to hear that all the time in church. Like, you never know who's watching you. And, my mom used to tell me, pay attention to your surroundings. And to hear, like, you never know who's watching you. I remember the first time I heard that, I'm just like, I don't want people watching me. Don't,
Right.
don't,
Right.
don't watch me, because then that puts me on eggshells. Like, I need to be this perfect person. And
Mhm.
I feel like we have unrealistic expectations of people,
Right.
thinking that, oh, you're wonderful. You do this thing great.
Mhm.
You're this perfect person. No, I fall short. I
Mhm.
cry. I fuss. I
Right.
sit back and don't do anything. And I know that, you've definitely been there.
And we've also I've also been told you're stronger than you think you are.
Right.
No, that's just the front that I put on because for most of my life I've always had to be that strong person for other people.
Mhm.
But in this moment right now, I need somebody to be strong for me.
Exactly.
And I had to teach myself that it was okay not to be okay.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
once I got to that point where I realized it was okay not to be okay, I
Yeah.
was able to go through the process of
Yeah.
healing.
Absolutely, absolutely. That's a whole nother wonderful conversation we need to have about, being strong. It's like it's embedded in our DNA, and that goes way, way back in history. We're not even gonna have that conversation, but many know, it's just been traditional that you stay strong and keep your head up and your chest out, and that's fine and all, but what happens to your mental health when you're doing that
Mm,
and robotically, to the
mhm.
point that you get to a breaking point, and we never want that to happen.
No.
So y'all check on your strong friends.
Amen.
Check on your strong friends. um I want to move a little bit into the stigma space. That's a word that many of us just get so tired of hearing, but it's our reality. It's really our reality.
Right.
So, we often talk about stigma broadly, but it shows up in very real ways, with HIV, without HIV, being a woman, being Black, whatever. Can you share a moment when you experienced stigma and what that taught you about your own strength and voice?
Mm. I was going through the process of applying for disability. And at that time, the lawyer that I had, he asked me a question. He said, how do you know where you got HIV from? And in that moment, he assumed that because I was HIV positive, that I was gay. And one, I had to catch myself not to speak out of turn. I had to, in that moment, I had to say, wait a minute, think about what you're going to say and let it be an educational moment. So I'm like, I know because of who I am, I know who I have been with. And in that moment, we talked, and it just reminded me that I needed to speak out for others too. I needed to educate people and let them know that HIV is not just a gay disease. Everybody is HIV possible. If you're not protecting yourself, if you're not having that difficult conversation with your partner, you are HIV possible. And once I said that to him, he sat there for a minute and he actually apologized. So that let me know that when I took that moment to think before I acted, that I had grown. Cause the old me wouldn't have took that moment and thought I would have popped off, and that would have made things worse for myself.
Mhm.
So I actually thank him for that moment, for reminding me that take that when you feel like you're gonna pop off or say something that you shouldn't, take that moment and think about the ramifications of what's gonna happen.
Right, right. And that could be hard. That's growth right there.
Yes.
That's growth. And you said earlier you're a waterhead. Like I am for sure a waterhead, especially if I'm real mad. Mm,
Mm-hmm.
mm. It's like, please don't mistake these tears for weakness, because you
Right.
don't even know how I have tore you up in the back of my head, and how
Mm-hmm.
bloody my tongue is from biting my tongue. Because
Mm-hmm.
it's easier to lash out at you, but it's better to respond in a way that's going to give you some education and that's going to shake you and make you check yourself.
Right.
Oh, it can be hard.
Or you you can actually check them without them realizing what you're doing.
Exactly. Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
And it feels good. It does feel good, especially when you know that you could have went the other route that owe you, but then
Yes.
that mature you come up
Mm-hmm.
and pimp slap somebody with some knowledge without them
I
even
was
real.
proud of myself in that moment. I was like, okay, you have really grown.
Exactly. Exactly. And I'm proud of you because you have grown
Thank
since you and I have met. It hasn't been a long time, but it feels like a long time.
you.
But
Right.
you definitely have. So we still working on that face though. Working on that face.
I don't know if that's gonna change.
It might.
I've been trying 48 years, and I don't know. It's slowly getting better. It's slowly getting better.
It is.
Of
May not
not
be 100%, but it's coming
right,
along.
slowly getting right.
It's coming along. And sometimes, you know what? You allowed that face because, and many know about the facial expressions.
Right.
Sometimes it's safer to do that face instead
Mm-hmm.
of letting those words come off them lips. So,
Yes.
it's okay. We're going to give you some grace.
Well, thank you. Thank you.
We're going to give you some grace. I'm not seeing any questions, but do you see any questions? I do have more, but just want to stop because I saw a few comments. Um, I know that I saw a comment from Tessa Irvin, and I think I missed a couple, but did you see any questions or anything in there?
No, I don't see any questions. It's a lot of positive comments. And I would like to take a moment to say thank you to everyone that has joined in to watch this exclusive interview that you and I are doing.
Yes.
It I had to think about it a lot before I actually did it, but I'm thankful that I'm able to share my heart with others.
Yes.
They can see that there's another side to Toya that not everybody gets to see. And I also just thank you for everyone for being here. Thank you for your positive comments. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll make sure they get answered.
Yes, I'm glad you took that moment because that goes right into me wanting to ask you if you could sit down with a version of yourself from 2018, the day of your diagnosis, what would you say to her now?
Hmm. Whew. Girl, you have come a long way. that that's the first thing. The second thing would be you overcame that negativity that those doctors tried to put on you. Instead of you giving up, you prayed, You got in your word. You reached out to people that could keep you lifted up when you couldn't stand on your own. You build your own community. You have become a powerhouse that is not only just a motivational speaker, but in telling your story, you're healing yourself and others.
Yes. 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 It's always thought provoking to go back to who we were years ago and like, what would I say to you? Because I've, in counseling sessions, if anybody has done counseling before, there's always seems to be that question, writing a letter to your younger self
Right.
and writing letters to whomever have hurt you, even if you don't give them that letter, whatever. The purpose isn't for them, it's always for us.
Right.
It's peeling another layer of the onion back to
Mhm.
get to the nucleus of healing. That's always the goal, get to healing.
And it's taking our power back from
Yeah.
them because they're going to continue to do whatever they're doing. They ain't no longer thinking about you.
Mm,
You staying mad at them is only hurting you.
yes.
That means you're not in that space of healing.
Mm,
And, but once you learn to forgive, you don't have to forget, but forgive, you can move on to more positivity.
yeah, yeah. I love that. And when you said that, it took me back to when we were talking about being strong. And if I had to give people grace who said, you're stronger than you think you are and things like that, yeah, as you heal, you do get stronger. You
Right.
do, which is, possibly another reason why you're able to get through the next phase. And when things happen, it's just like, I don't know how I'm going to get through this. But if you think back to that really, really hard thing that you thought that was not, you were not going to get through, and you did, and that's a part of your strength. So when people hear your name or encounter your work, what do you want them to feel or remember about LaToya Murchison?
Hmm. She learned that healing had her name on it. She learned that she didn't have to be quiet and sit in the back anymore. It was okay for her to sit out front with everyone else. It was okay for her not to be okay, but it was not okay for her to not pick herself up. It was okay for her to love out loud. It was okay for her to share her story. It was okay for her to just live, actually live life. Because, sometimes she forgot about herself, but then I learned how to take care of me. Like you said with those letters, I did those letters to myself, forgiving myself. And once I forgave myself, I knew that it was just the beginning for me.
Yes, being your unapologetic self is so powerful. It's so
Yes,
powerful and so needed.
yes.
So I want to transition into like a closing question. I always like to bring us back to the person who may be listening quietly, taking this all in. So, for the woman who may be listening right now, scared, overwhelmed, and unsure, what would you say to her in this moment?
You are not alone. there is a community of people you can reach out to help you, even if you don't meet them, see them in person. Building that community, well, for me, building that community of people online, it gave me a strength I didn't know I had within myself. Know that there are people that can hold you up when you can't walk on your own. This is not a death sentence. There is life after this diagnosis. And don't be afraid to reach out and get help. Make sure you have a strong connection with your care team, that you can be able to actually tell them how you're really feeling and work through those emotions.
Wow, LaToya, thank you for allowing me to interview you. This has been a great, very transparent and relieving and sunshiny day just to be with you and to talk about, your personal story. Thank you for your honesty. Thank you for your faith. And thank you for your willingness to speak even in the storm. What I'm taking from this conversation is a reminder that healing doesn't always look perfect. And
Mm-hmm.
purpose doesn't wait until everything feels okay. Sometimes purpose is born right in the middle of whatever it is you're trying to survive. And for anyone listening, I want you to hear this clearly. As LaToya said, you're not alone and you're not forgotten. And your story, no matter where you are in it, it still has meaning. So, LaToya, your life is a testimony of that. Thank you again for trusting us with your story and for continuing to create space for others to find theirs. And to everyone listening, take a deep breath, carry this with you, and remember, even in the storm, purpose still speaks.
Thank you again for accepting the invitation. I wouldn't have done this interview with anyone else, and I love and appreciate you for not only being my mentor and my friend, but for being that sister that I never knew I needed. Have a good day, everyone.